Hello everybody, I hope you're having a great day. I wanted to let you know about a few things about the channel, just in case you might not have known. So if you like listening to these stories and you want to listen to them elsewhere, you can also listen to them on iTunes and Spotify, Google Podcasts, and pretty much any other streaming service too. And all you have to do to find it is just search The Dark Somnium, and I'll post a picture right here of what the page looked like. I'm working on getting all of the uploads from YouTube onto the streaming platforms. Currently, I think I have around 230 or 240 stories on there, but I need to go back and get my older stories on there too. So I'm going to be consistently uploading to those places too, in case you want to listen to them on the Spotify or iTunes and whatnot. And the other thing I was going to say is that I have some new merch out, and I'll link to that in the description and pinned comment. And I do plan on having some more new merch out with this next story that I'm going to be releasing on Monday. And some of the merch that I'm going to be doing, I'm commissioning, is going to be based on the stories that I'm reading. Just like this most recent one, it was based on Forest of a Thousand Legs. And the last two things I want to mention is that for those of you that don't know, I make all the music myself for these videos. And if you like the music that you hear in the stories, you can probably find it over on my music channel, which is Somnium Music. And I'll link that in the pinned comment and description also. And the final thing I'll say is that I have been working pretty hard to get back on track with normal uploads. I have my next two stories already recorded. The sound design is almost done on the next one, which will be going up on Monday. And then I'll start the sound design on the one after that, which will probably be either next Wednesday or Thursday or Friday if the sound design takes me a while. But I'm planning on doing 2 videos a week and getting into the rhythm of that, and then going at 2-3 videos a week, which will be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But for now, we'll just do Monday and Friday while I get into the swing of things again. But yeah, I'm really excited to be back with some new videos for you all. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think of this one. And at the end of this video, I'll be bringing back my thoughts section where I'll be talking about what I thought of the story if you care to stick around to listen. But with that said, enjoy the story. Part 1. Incursion. I woke up on the floor, my head pounding and my eyes struggling to adjust to the harsh, artificial lights. Pulling myself up from the rough carpet, I fought against the pain in my creaking joints as I tried to come to terms with my environment. Where was I? I didn't know. All I could see inside was a coffee table, a television set, the ceiling above me, and a small window covered by a thick curtain. The TV drew my attention. It was switched on but displayed only a test card, whilst the speakers blared out a high-pitched tone. Once my eyes adjusted, I read the message on screen. It said, "Emergency broadcast, scenario 217, incursion." There were no further details. I didn't know what this meant, but the cryptic message made me feel uneasy. But my surroundings were the least of my concerns. The room and the TV did give me an uncomfortable feeling of déjà vu, but what really frightened me was my lack of memory. I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten here. But I also didn't know who I was. My mind was blank, as if I'd been suddenly zapped into existence. I didn't know anything, not even my own identity. Panic might well have ensued in that moment, except when I looked to the coffee table, I saw 3 items. The first of which was a post-it note with a message written upon it, and the note read, "Your name is Adam. Please proceed down the staircase and onto the street." I didn't quite know how I felt after reading those words. In a sense, it was good to have some information and instruction, as well as a clue to my identity. Adam. That name was definitely familiar, and yet it didn't sound quite right. Still, I decided to park that question for the time being. My first priority was my physical condition. On the table beside the note sat a bottle of water and an energy bar. I suppose I should have been suspicious of the supplies they'd provided, but I was hungry and thirsty, so I wasted no time in drinking and eating. When my meal was done, I looked down at my body, familiarizing myself with my own physical form. I was wearing a gray sweater, light blue jeans, and plain white trainers. There was nothing unique about my outfit. I felt throbbing pains throughout my body, and when I pulled up my sweater and rolled up my jeans, I saw my skin was covered in purple bruises and barely healed cuts, and I noted there was a small puncture wound on my chest. Again, I had no memory of how I'd obtained these minor injuries, but I didn't have any broken bones and could walk without much discomfort. That was something to be grateful for, I guess. The mysterious note had given me instructions. They wanted me to leave the room, walk downstairs, and exit the building, but this didn't sit right with me. Who were they? Who wrote the note, and what did they want from me? Did these people hurt me, take my memory, and leave me here? If so, why should I trust them? I didn't leave the room, not yet. Instead, I walked over to the window and cautiously pulled back the curtain before peeking outside. I discovered it was the middle of the day with the sun high in the sky above. I was on the second story of a house looking out onto an empty road. There were more houses on the opposite side of the street, detached, two-floored, tidy homes painted white, surrounded by picket fences and neatly trimmed green lawns. It seemed like a nice and quiet suburban neighborhood, but even in my confused state, I knew something wasn't right. Call it deja vu or a sixth sense, but the sight of the empty street brought an icy chill up my spine. It wasn't just that the street was empty, it was abandoned. No one walked the pavements, no cars drove along the tarmac, and there were no lights or faces in any of the windows. The scene was eerie and frankly chilling. Looking over the lifted roofs of the houses, I saw mighty snow-peaked mountains on the far horizon, a foreboding detail which made me feel even more cut off. I stood at the window for a long time, my hand shaking as I held open the curtain. I didn't want to go out there. I couldn't say why, but I had this bad feeling that something terrible would happen to me if I stepped outside. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't seen her. A woman who I thought I recognized. She was the one who drew me out. I heard her before I saw her, a frightened female voice carrying down the street, begging for someone, anyone, to help her.
Hello? Is there anybody out there?
The young woman walked out onto the street while I remained hidden behind the curtain, peeking out at her. She was a slight woman, petite, her body hidden under baggy jeans and a gray sweater, a near-identical uniform to my own. Her blonde hair was cut short, and her blue eyes full of expression, but also fear. I didn't think I knew the woman, but seeing her did provoke a memory in the back of my mind and a twinge of emotion in my heart. There was vulnerability to her for sure, but also a feminine strength which I found attractive. I still wasn't entirely happy about stepping outside, but I knew I had to go out to the woman's aid. Therefore, I finally left the room, descended down the narrow staircase, and placed my sweaty palm upon the handle, cautiously opening the front door before I walked along the pathway. The sun shone down upon my head. The light wind blew my hair, and my nostrils picked up on an unpleasant odor, something akin to rotting flesh. But I ignored all these senses as I called out to her. "Hey there, are you okay, ma'am?" She looked surprised when she saw me, her blue eyes widening and shoulders stiffening. The woman had been searching for help, but still, she was suspicious. Hell, I didn't even know who she was. She looked me up and down from across the street and must have decided I seemed okay because she crossed the road to greet me.
Thank God,
the woman exclaimed while she held out her slender hand for me to shake. I did so gladly, savoring the warmth of her touch.
I thought I was all alone out here. My name's Eve, apparently. That's what the note says anyway.
This piqued my interest. Do you remember anything? Eve shook her head.
No, not really. I have some fleeting images in my head. A fight, blood, and then this place.
She looked down the road to the far distant horizon.
The mountains. I remember those damn mountains. Always too far away to reach.
She sounded sad and wistful as she stared at the distant peaks. I was troubled, but tried to bring the conversation back to practical business. Well, I'm Adam, I guess. Seems like you remember more than I do, Eve. I've got nothing. Can't recall a thing since I woke up. I'm glad I found you, though. Eve turned to face me, a sweet smile appearing on her ruby lips. I looked to the other end of the road, which seemed to lead to a main street. I think we should head into town and see if we can find other people. Someone's got to know something about what's going on here.
Sounds like a plan.
Eve nodded in agreement. We said little during our short walk to the mysterious town's main street, but I noticed Eve eyeing me up and down, and I did the same to her. I couldn't explain it at the time, but there was a familiarity between the two of us, like we were old friends and had walked this path before. This brought me some temporary comfort, but What we found in the town center didn't answer any of our questions. The main street was short, consisting of rows of empty storefronts with glass windows and locked doors, a handful of parked cars which were also locked and no signs of life. At the end of the street there was a white church with a tall steeple towering above the town, and at the other end stood a gas station with pumps neatly lined up. Eve and I stood on the tarmac for a moment, baffled and unclear of what to do next. It was Eve who decided, pointing to the church's steeple and saying,
"Well, I guess that's where salvation lies."
I laughed nervously but followed her lead, even though I had a bad feeling about that church, especially as the unpleasant smell seemed to get worse the closer we got. But before we reached the holy house, we stumbled upon a third survivor. The man charged out from a smashed storefront, wielding a metal pipe which he was using as a makeshift weapon. He wore the same clothes as we did, but his look was one of near insanity, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild. I saw him as a threat and instinctively moved to defend Eve, placing myself between her and the would-be attacker. The man paused when he saw I was willing to defend myself, but I didn't want violence, not if it could be avoided.
"Who the fuck are you people?"
He demanded while still holding the pipe aloft. I raised my hand in an attempt to calm him. Hey, take it easy, buddy. We're not the enemy here. I'm guessing you woke up in a room too, with your name written on a post-it note? And you don't remember anything else. Does that sound familiar? My explanation seemed to calm the man down, as he slowly lowered his weapon, and some of the anger left his bloodshot eyes.
"I'm sorry, guys. I thought you were the people who brought me here.
He turned and pointed the pipe at the smashed window.
I broke in to try and find a phone or radio, anything to contact the outside world. But there's nothing. It looks like every building is an empty husk."
I nodded my head in grim acknowledgement.
"What's your name?"
Eve asked, addressing her question to the newcomer. He shrugged his shoulders before answering.
"According to the note, I'm called Thomas, if you can believe that."
Eve let out a nervous laugh. "We're going to check out the church down there. You're welcome to join us. None of us know what's going on, but I reckon we should stick together. The safety in numbers, you know what I mean?" Thomas nodded his head, seemingly won over by Eve's words. And so we became a trio. As the three of us made our way down the empty road and towards the ominous steeple, I don't know what we expected to find inside the church. We only headed there because it was the largest building in this seemingly abandoned town. I did feel apprehensive as we approached the solid wood front door, and I'm ashamed to admit that I held back as Eve stepped forward and pushed the door open, revealing the hall inside. We all froze in shock at the sight. Dozens of pews lined up and facing an empty altar, but the pews weren't empty. There were dozens of people sitting upon them, or so it seemed at first. All had their backs to the three of us, and none turned to face us when the door was opened. There was an eerie silence inside the church hall, and it seemed unwise to break it. But it was Thomas who called out in an attempt to gain the parishioners' attention.
"Hey, what the hell's the matter with you people?"
There was no answer, not a peep. It was Eve who acted next, ignoring my whispered warnings as she walked down the aisle to investigate. She stood over one of the seated figures for a moment before smiling and calling out in all clear.
"It's okay. They're just dummies."
Thomas and I cautiously stepped forward, soon confirming what Eve had told us. The seated parishioners were all mannequins, their dead eyes facing forward toward the pulpit. I examined several, noting how realistic they appeared, right down to their facial features and the Sunday best suits and dresses they wore. Eve and I were in awe of these creepy dummies, but Thomas was unimpressed, losing his temper once again as he lashed out. I heard a heavy crack and swung around, seeing how Thomas had smashed the head off one of the mannequins with his pipe.
"To hell with this!"
He shouted before storming out the door. Eve chased after him and I followed. Soon the three of us were back on the street.
"Thomas, where are you going?"
Thomas turned around, standing on the sidewalk as he frantically replied.
"I'm getting as far away as I can, lady. This fucking town is creeping me out. I'm gonna walk."
Thomas never got a chance to finish his sentence, because in that moment, he was impaled through the chest with a sharp appendage having entered through his back before exiting via his ribcage. My jaw dropped as I watched the blood pouring from Thomas's mouth and his eyes rolling up into his skull. Eve screamed as Thomas's limp body was lifted off the ground, and he saw the terrifying creature which had killed him. The appendage used to impale poor Thomas was in fact the creature's left arm, sharp like a spear and surely designed to cut through flesh and bone. The monster itself was unlike anything I'd seen before, truly the stuff of nightmares. It stood at least 10 feet tall, towering over its slaughtered victim. I would describe it as humanoid, but the proportions of its body were all wrong. Its limbs long and slim, and its skin pale white. It walked on 2 gangly legs. Both of its arms were shaped like spears, but the worst was its hideous face, with dark, soulless eyes and a short snout filled with sharp fangs. Eve was still screaming, and I was frozen in terror. Meanwhile, the monster was focused upon its victim for that moment, using its immense strength to lift Thomas off the pavement, watching as his blood spilled onto the sidewalk. I realized the monster wouldn't be occupied for long, so I broke from my shock-induced trance, grabbing Eve's hand as we both sprinted down the road in a blind panic, fleeing towards the gas station at the far end of the street. We had a brief head start, but the monster's attention was drawn towards us. It promptly dropped Thomas's body down on the concrete and let out a blood-curdling roar before tearing down the road in pursuit. "Don't look back!" I screamed as we both ran for our lives, but the beast was right behind us, screeching in sadistic anticipation as its long legs thudded on the tarmac. Honestly, I didn't think we would have made it, but our masked savior appeared in the nick of time, charging out of the station's forecourt with fire in his hands.
"Over here!
The newcomer ordered.
Get behind me!"
We did as instructed, and the masked man threw a Molotov cocktail over our heads. I glanced over my shoulder in time to see the projectile hit home. The bomb exploded in the monster's path. The flame shot up and burned its long legs, forcing the creature to scream in pain. It was hurt, but not fatally. We kept on running, and our mysterious savior sprinted after us, directing us through the forecourt and towards the open manhole on the adjoining street.
"Get down the ladder! It can't follow us!"
Eve went below ground first, I was second, and our savior was last. The furious beast was right on top of us, reaching out with its still bloody arm, but our savior acted fast, replacing and sealing the cover just in time. We heard the monster smashing against the metal while screaming bloody murder, but our savior was right. It couldn't get down there, and eventually the beast gave up and moved on. We were left in the dark for a moment. The mystery man illuminated our faces with a battery-powered flashlight. I wonder where he'd found it and how he'd manufactured a Molotov cocktail. But this wasn't the priority right now. Our savior removed his mask and used the flashlight to show us his face. I noted the rough stubble on his chin, the deep scar along his right cheek, and the look of steely determination in his dark eyes. This was a serious man, I was sure of it.
Thank you. Thank you for saving us.
Anytime.
I was grateful for his assistance, but also suspicious. Who are you?
The name's Drake. At least that's what they told me.
Do you know what's happening here?
Not really. But I've seen and heard a few things since I woke up. And I have my theories.
He pointed up at the street above.
The town up there. I think it's an apocalypse town. They built them out in the desert during the 50s. Whole towns with houses, businesses, churches, and gas stations. But no people. Only mannequins. They build them to test the effects of nuclear detonations on civilian areas.
I shook my head, confused and worried by the implication of his outlandish theory. I don't understand what you're saying. There are people in this town, we're here, and what the hell is going on up there? Drake shrugged his shoulders.
That, I can't tell you. I've been fleeing from the monster for the past 2 days. Seen it kill 4 people so far, including your friend outside the church. We can fight the monster, but we can't kill it. Our only chance is to get out.
You have a plan?
Drake pointed his flashlight to illuminate the passage ahead.
This tunnel leads to another manhole on the edge of town. I suggest we exit there and start walking.
Walking? I interjected in near disbelief.
Yes, I've checked every vehicle in town. None of them will start. Hell, half don't even have engines. Walking is our only option. We trek up into the mountains and keep going until we find something. A road where we can hitch a ride, a cabin with a phone, anything.
I was far from convinced. And what happens if that thing follows us? Drake nodded his head to acknowledge my point.
It's a possibility, but this town is its hunting ground. We can hide down here for a while, but eventually we'll need to go topside for supplies. Sooner or later, this son of a bitch will get us. If we stay.
I couldn't argue with that. On the surface, Drake seemed like a survivor and our best bet at getting out of this, but still, I had a bad feeling about the guy. Had I met him before? Did I have a reason for not trusting him? As hard as I tried, I just couldn't remember. Eve seemed impressed, however.
Sounds like a plan.
I couldn't argue with her. We walked for the best part of a mile underground, trudging through the cold and damp, traversing the dark tunnel with the phony town above us. My feelings of paranoia didn't go away, not even when Drake ascended the ladder and removed the manhole cover. He announced it was all clear. Eve quickly climbed the ladder after him, and I eventually followed. Drake had told a half-truth. Once we emerged from the tunnels, I could see the town behind us and the mountains in front, but there was a big problem. Our path was blocked by a perimeter wall, at least 20 feet tall, made of solid concrete and topped with razor-sharp barbed wire. The barrier stood between the town and the mountains, and it seemed to entirely surround the settlement, making escape impossible. Eve looked up at the wall in despair. I turned in anger towards Drake, ready to deliver an angry rebuke, but I saw he was looking back towards the town, and when I turned in that direction, I found out why. The monster was there, standing tall on its long, gangly legs, its eyes jet black and focused upon us with a predatory zeal. We were trapped out in the open, and the monster had us in its sights. The beast roared in bloodthirsty glee before charging forward across the dead ground. I looked back towards the manhole, but I didn't think we would make it in time, and Eve was up against the wall, frozen in terror. But Drake stayed perfectly calm, even as the monster charged towards him with murderous intent. I watched on in awe as Drake deftly reached into his pocket and removed a small device, similar to a car key or remote control. I thought he must be crazy, but when Drake pressed the button on the device, it had an instant effect. The tall monster stopped its attack, screeching in pain before retreating back towards the town, defeated and off to lick its own wounds. I was astonished by the sudden turnaround in our fortunes, as was Eve. She walked forward to confront Drake, asking,
What the hell did you do?
But when Drake turned to face us, I saw his expression had changed. There was a look of cold malice in his dark eyes. Drake moved quickly, withdrawing a small black pistol which he'd concealed in his waistline. I shouted out a warning to Eve, but it was too late. Drake pulled the trigger and there was a low popping sound. Eve cried out softly before collapsing into the dirt with a dart embedded in her chest. I was overcome by fury in that moment, roaring as I charged towards the treacherous Drake. But he simply smiled before pulling the trigger for a second time. I felt the painful impact on my chest, stumbling backwards as an unknown substance coursed through my veins. I soon became lightheaded, losing my footing as I collapsed to the ground, and everything went black. I awoke sometime later with a throbbing pain throughout my body and a thumping headache. I had an uncomfortable feeling of déjà vu. Taking a moment, I recalled the previous events. The town, the chase, that thing, and Drake's betrayal. But what about Eve? She'd been beside me when I tried to get up but couldn't get my footing. Where was I? I recalled waking up in the room, in the house, with a window looking out onto a suburban street, but now I was somewhere else. I'd woken on a hard bunk in a small, windowless cell with concrete walls and a steel door locked from the outside. I didn't understand. Had Drake brought me here after he knocked me out? And what about Eve? What had the bastard done to her? I forced myself up onto shaking feet and slammed my fist against the metal door, finding my voice as I cried out. A moment passed before I heard the clink of keys being placed in the lock. I stood back from the cell door as it swung open, only to be confronted by a pair of burly guards, men dressed in black uniforms and wielding batons. I asked them who they were and where I was, but the guards refused to answer my questions. Instead, they roughly manhandled me, dragging my limp body out into the corridor. I tried to fight them, but was still weak after whatever Drake had shot into me, and so there was little I could do to resist. The corridor was narrow, featureless, and illuminated by harsh strip lights. We were halfway down the passage when I heard the muffled screeching and incessant banging of the caged beast. The guards dragged me past a second door with a portal window, and I saw the monster locked inside, now imprisoned in what I hoped was a secure pen. The creature seemed to recognize me, but its black eyes widened in fury, and it slammed its spear-like arms against the reinforced glass. I winced in terror, but the guards simply laughed as they pushed me forward.
Want us to arrange a playdate for you two?
One of the guards quipped. I ignored the mockery and threats, and finally we reached the end of the corridor. The guards forced me inside yet another room and sat me down upon a hard metal chair in the center. Then proceeded to strap me down, securing my wrists and ankles so I couldn't escape. When the job was done, the guards left the room, and two others walked in. One man looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. He wore a white lab coat over a shirt and tie, and he had a bushy beard, a pair of thick glasses, and a sympathetic look in his eyes. I thought he looked like a kindly doctor or professor, and I believed he was a potential ally. But the second man was all too familiar, even though his clothes had changed since our previous encounter. Now he wore the same black uniform as the guards, complete with a peaked cap and bars on his sleeves to indicate his rank. But I knew the man straight away, recognizing the scar on his cheek and the cruel smile on his crusty lips. It was Drake, the man who presented himself as our savior, but it turned out to be a treacherous snake. My anger returned as I fought against my restraints and screamed fury at my captor. "You son of a bitch! You backstabbing motherfucker! What have you done with Eve?" Drake merely laughed at my insults, but the bearded man sought to calm the situation.
Adam, please. I understand you're upset and frightened, but please try to control yourself. Let me assure you, Eve is fine. She's still recovering from the effects of the sedative, but will be revived and debriefed in due course. Don't worry about her, Adam. Let's concentrate on you for the time being, shall we?
I shook my head in frustration, realizing I couldn't break free and so would have to cooperate. That thing? The monster? What is it?
Oh, that?
The bearded man answered in a matter-of-fact tone.
I can't really say for sure. We believe he came to our world through a cross-dimensional rift. Our zoologist nicknamed him the Stalker for obvious reasons. Clearly an alpha predator wherever he comes from. This one rampaged around northwest Alaska for several weeks, preying on local wildlife and the occasional hunter before our Wrangler team captured him. We brought him here to test how such a creature would adapt to an urban environment, and how a civilian population will respond to such an attack. As you can tell from Drake's little trick, we have a degree of control over the creature's actions, thanks to an inhibitor implanted inside him.
I took a deep breath, trying to process this flood of new information which the bearded man had so calmly communicated. What he was saying was insanity, but what other explanation was there? Still, one thing didn't make sense. "Why us?" I said pathetically, whilst looking the man in the eye. "Why me? Why are you doing this to me?" The bearded man smiled faintly before responding.
Well, Adam, that's what we're here to figure out, isn't it?
"What?" I shot back in confusion. The man sighed as if in disappointment before turning to his scar-faced companion.
Drake, could you please leave us?
Drake didn't look happy, but he obeyed the request, scowling before leaving the room. But Drake had parting words for me, smiling sadistically as he said,
I'll be seeing you real soon, buddy. It's time, Doc.
Once the door shut, the bearded man spoke to me one-on-one.
Now listen, Adam. This is important. We have met before. Several times, in fact. Do you remember me? Do you remember my name?
I did think, as hard as I could. Yes, he looked familiar. And yes, I thought I'd been in this position before, but there were huge gaps in my memory that I couldn't fill. I shook my head, feeling like I'd failed somehow. "I'm sorry. I don't know." The man sighed, louder this time.
That's okay, Adam.
He said sympathetically whilst walking over and touching me gently on the shoulder. I recoiled from his touch. He made me feel comfortable despite the situation.
My name is Gabriel, and I'm trying to help you, Adam.
He moved in close until he was whispering in my ear.
There's a reason why you're here, Adam. Something happened in your past. Something bad. But don't worry about that now. Your memories will be returned to you when the time is right.
His cryptic words brought a chill down my spine. What did he mean? What had happened? It frustrated me so much that I couldn't remember. The knowledge, the answer, it was buried somewhere deep in my subconscious, but I couldn't drag it out to the forefront. I noticed how Gabriel's tone became more urgent as he glanced warily towards the door.
We don't have much time. When Drake returns, I'll have to inject you with a sedative. It'll knock you out and wipe your memory. Then, it all starts again.
I looked up at him in desperation and pleaded for mercy. "Please, don't do this to me."
I have no choice. It's my job and they're watching me. But I'm on your side, Adam. I'm going to leave you a message for when you wake up. You need to find it and follow my instructions. It's the only way you and Eve will survive the next scenario. You need to work with me if you want to make it out alive.
I opened my mouth to speak. There were so many unanswered questions, but before I could talk, The door swung open and Drake marched back into the room. He said firmly, addressing his comment to Gabriel.
It's time, Doc.
Gabriel sighed and looked down at me with empathy whilst carefully removing a syringe from his coat pocket.
Please!
I begged, but it was no good. A moment later, I felt a sharp prick of the needle in my neck. I struggled, but it was futile as my body went limp and the darkness took me. Part 2. The Infected. I awoke upon a carpet in a near-empty room. My body ached and I struggled to drag myself up off the floor and adjust my weary eyes to the light. There was a TV in front of me. It was showing an emergency broadcast message. The test card read, Scenario 313, Infection. I didn't know what that meant, but I guessed it wasn't good. Looking at the coffee table, I found a note, a bottle of water, and an energy bar. The note said I was called Adam and told me to go outside. I couldn't remember anything, not really, just snippets and flashes. I vaguely recalled an empty town, a girl with blonde hair, and a monster with pale skin and long legs. It must have been a nightmare, I told myself. But there was something else. A man in a windowless room, a man with a beard, thick glasses, and a kind smile. He had told me something important, I was sure of it, but what? I searched my body and my clothes, ignoring the bruises and the puncture wounds on my skin as I emptied my pockets. But that's when I found the second note, the one I wasn't meant to have. And the note read as follows. Adam, this town is not what it seems, but you are in danger. Find Eve and help her. Do not trust Drake. He is not your friend. Eve, Drake. These names meant something to me. I thought I'd met them before. I could visualize them in my head. This place wasn't right, but I had to play their game if I wanted to get out. I drank the water, ate the bar, and proceeded down the staircase. With only a few seconds hesitation, I opened the front door and walked out onto the quiet suburban street. That's where I found her again. Eve. I knew it was her without having to ask, catching her gaze and looking into her deep blue eyes.
Adam?
She muttered nervously. I nodded my head in confirmation. As she ran forward and hugged me in a tight embrace.
Thank God!
She exclaimed emotionally.
I thought I'd lost you!
I was touched, but also confused. I vaguely remember Eve from our previous encounter, but she greeted me like we were old friends. Did she remember more than I did? Had there been previous encounters? And if so, how many? I parked these questions for a moment as we ended our embrace. You found a second note?
Yes. From Gabriel. He's trying to help us.
I nodded once again. Gabriel, the man in the bunker. I thought for a moment before asking my next question. Where do we go? Eve smiled knowingly before replying.
There's only one place we can go. To the main street. But we have to be prepared this time.
I took a deep breath, looking with apprehension towards the main street. We had to play their game, I told myself, and we had to trust Gabriel. He was our only way out. We walked the short distance to the town center, noting the empty storefronts, the white church with the towering spire, and the gas station with its empty forecourt. The scene was familiar, yet different in subtle ways. I remembered the sun shining down upon my head, but on this occasion, the sky was gray and the temperature cold. The air felt different somehow, but what really stood out was the smell. A stench fouler than I recalled, one of rotting flesh and lingering death. I experienced a grim foreboding in that moment, and I think Eve felt it too. We stood on the tarmac for a short while, looking down at the church. She shook her head, tears forming in the corner of her eyes.
I remember everything now. I remember too much.
I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the moment was interrupted. We saw a woman running out from the church, dark-haired, middle-aged, and carrying a little too much weight. She wore the same prisoner's uniform as we did, but what struck me was the terror in her eyes as she waved frantically in our direction as she shouted,
Run! Get the fuck out of here!
I wondered what had spooked her, but a second later I got my answer. Another half-dozen figures charged out from inside the church, all screaming with murderous rage. The crazed mob was a mixture of men and women, although it was difficult to make the distinction. In fact, the six barely looked human. They wore the same blue jeans and gray sweaters as we did, except theirs were stained with blood. Their eyes were red and bloodshot, and their mouths dripped with ripped flesh and dark blood. They were more like animals than human beings. Predators focused upon their prey, and their target was the terrified woman who was only a stride away from them. She tried to run but didn't make it far before the murderous horde were upon her. We could only watch on in terror and awe as the six knocked the screaming woman down to the tarmac and set upon her in a savage, merciless assault, ripping, tearing, and biting until the screaming stopped.
Oh, Jesus!
Eve swore as she averted her eyes from the bloodshed. I realized the danger we were in, grabbing Eve by the hand and shouting, "We need to go!" A second later, the two of us were running, once again running for our lives. I glanced over my shoulder, noting the mob were chasing after us. Their psychotic rage now focused upon Eve and I, except now the six had become seven, with the latest victim joining their number. We sprinted toward the gas station at the far end of the street. There was nowhere else to go. Another figure emerged from the courtyard, a masked man with fire in his hands.
Over here!
I might have hesitated because I didn't trust the masked man, but compared to the bloodthirsty killers chasing us, the newcomer seemed like the better option. He threw the Molotov cocktail, hitting the lead zombie on the head. The flames engulfed the beast, burning his entire body. He screamed in pain, but kept on running until the fire destroyed his flesh. But the other six were undeterred, continuing to chase with full intention of ripping us to shreds. Our masked savior grabbed hold of a crowbar before leading us through the forecourt and towards the open manhole. Eve went down first, then me, and finally our savior. We got the manhole cover shut just before the enraged zombies reached the hole. A familiar pattern. He climbed down the ladder and illuminated the darkness with his flashlight before removing his mask to reveal his scarred face. And suddenly, it all fell into place. The mysterious savior, the note, the scar. I looked to Eve, and she remembered him too. I shot the man a suspicious glare, saying, "Drake?" There was a spark of surprise in his eyes as he muttered,
How did you know?
but his next action was one of violence. As he lashed out with his crowbar to strike me down, I reacted on instinct, grabbing hold of his weapon and tussling with my attacker. I fought with all my strength, but still Drake overpowered me, throwing me down into the water. He stood over me, his cruel smile illuminated by the flashlight as he raised his weapon.
I've been waiting a long time for this, Adam.
He exclaimed with sadistic glee while preparing to strike. I prepared myself for the heavy blow of the crowbar, but it was Eve who came to my rescue. She jumped on top of Drake's shoulders, using her small figure to the maximum extent as she tried to bring him down. Her attack didn't last long, however, as Drake cursed and threw her down, but the distraction gave me an opportunity to unleash the rage inside me. In an instant, I was on my feet, roaring with fury as I charged forward and took Drake by surprise, shoving him hard against the concrete and hitting him again and again until he collapsed into the water. My anger subsided as I went to Eve's aid and helped her up. Eve grabbed hold of Drake's discarded flashlight while I took the crowbar, and then we started running down the underground tunnel, heading for the exit we knew lay at its end. I thought Drake was unconscious, but I heard him following us down the tunnel, shouting murderous threats as he came. We reached the ladder and I pushed Eve up first, preparing myself to fight Drake so she could get away. I saw the light from the surface when the cover was removed, saw Eve climbing out, and then I heard her scream. Drake was still trudging down the tunnel, but I ignored him, crying out Eve's name as I climbed out and went to her aid. I reached the surface and discovered a horrifying scene. Eve was on the ground, still screaming and fighting for her life as a female zombie bit into the flesh of her arm. I shot forward, bringing the crowbar down on the zombie's head, crushing her skull with one fatal blow. Eve was still crying, nursing the bloody wound upon her arm. She looked sick, her face red and sweat pouring from every orifice. Are you okay? I asked, even though I realized it was a stupid question.
I'm burning!
Eve screamed before she kneeled over and vomited puke and blood on the tarmac.
She's infected,
said a gruff voice from behind me. I turned to see Drake emerging from the manhole, beaten up but still in one piece, and was watching the bloody scene from the sidelines.
You have between 10 and 20 seconds to kill her before she turns.
My jaw dropped and I glared at Drake in disgust, but when I turned back to Eve, I saw she was convulsing violently on the ground.
Do it! Kill her, or you're next!
Suddenly, Eve stopped shaking, her body rising from the ground with a newfound purpose. She turned to face me, and I realized it was no longer Eve. Now, her eyes were red and filled with the same murderous rage as the other zombies. She opened her mouth and screamed like a banshee before charging forward. I didn't even think, only acting to defend myself as I smashed her skull with the crowbar, feeling sick when her limp body collapsed heavily to the asphalt. I experienced a stabbing guilt in that moment, dropping to my knees and crying out with grief, but it was Drake's hateful words which reignited the rage inside me.
Another one down. I guess you live another day, Adam.
Turning and raising the crowbar with the intention of using it on my enemy, but Drake already had the gun in his hand, and he pulled the trigger without hesitation. The dart struck me in the chest. I felt woozy, but the adrenaline kept me going for a little while. Staggering forward, I tried to lash out with the crowbar, but Drake shot me a second time. And that's all I could take. My body collapsed, and I returned to darkness. I woke in a windowless, subterranean cell, my body aching and head pounding. Somehow I wasn't surprised by my surroundings. 2 guards came to my cell and dragged me out into the corridor. I could hear the screams of imprisoned infected as they tried to break out of their cells, but the zombies were no longer my concern. They frog-marched me into a room and strapped me to a chair. I barely resisted, knowing this was all part of the routine. The guards left, and soon after, Gabriel and Drake entered. I was angered by Drake's presence, cursing angrily whilst I fought against my restraints, but Drake simply laughed as he openly mocked me.
What's the matter, Adam? Upset about your little girlfriend?
"Fuck you!" I snarled in response. Gabriel was next to speak.
Drake, can you please give us the room? I need to speak with the subject in private.
Drake clearly wasn't happy, and for a moment I thought he would refuse the request, but ultimately Drake did leave, but not before delivering a final threat.
Your time is coming, Adam. My face will be the last one you see.
I felt a cold chill run through me, realizing that Drake would be out to kill me next time around. Gabriel was my only hope. The bearded doctor smiled at me sympathetically before offering his condolences.
I am sorry about Eve. More than you know. I wanted to get both of you out. But you did the right thing, Adam. Once the infection takes hold, there's no other choice.
What did you do to those people? Gabriel lowered his head in shame before replying.
It's a virus, transmitted through the blood and saliva. Induces extreme aggression in those infected. Man-made, of course. They designed it as a biological weapon. I was against the field test for what it's worth. The test proved what I'd always argued. The spread of the virus cannot be controlled in an urban environment. The remaining infected will be destroyed, and I hope the project will be shut down. But that's not important right now.
I shook my head in disbelief, struggling to process all the madness. What do you mean? Gabriel looked back at the doorway to ensure we couldn't be heard, but he leaned in to whisper in my ear.
They're not going to wipe away your memory, Adam. Not this time. The next scenario will be the last at this location, and the town itself will be destroyed.
I felt like laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. What are you doing this time? A damn alien invasion? Gabriel surprised me by nodding his head in acknowledgement before answering.
Actually, you're not far off the mark. This final scenario involves an attack by autonomous aerial drones. They're lethal, but won't be your main opposition.
Again, he looked towards the empty doorway before continuing.
It's Drake. He wants you dead. There'll be no pretense this time. He'll hunt you down like a dog, Adam. Your only chance is to kill him first. Take care of Drake, and I'll get you out of here. That's a promise.
I hardly had time to process his crazy instructions before Gabriel removed the syringe from his coat pocket.
Godspeed, Adam. I'll see you on the other side.
Before I could respond, he jabbed the needle into my neck and I lost consciousness. Part 3. Invasion. I awoke in a familiar place, on the carpet in that empty room, as the process started all over again. I ignored the note, but ate the energy bar and drank the water, realizing I would need my strength for the fight ahead. The TV was on, and the emergency broadcast message read, Scenario 609, Invasion. I realized the empty streets of this fake town were a place of extreme danger, but I couldn't run or hide, so I'd need to face my nemesis. I went to the staircase, but paused for a brief moment, as a flash of memory entered my throbbing head. It wasn't a memory about the town, but instead from my life before all this. I felt sick as I relived flashes of a tragic event. Smoke, fire, screaming. Who had I been before all of this? What had happened to bring me to this man-made hellscape? I had to park those questions for the time being, as my priority was to survive what was coming, and so I descended the staircase and exited the house, making my way down the suburban street into the town center. There were other subjects waiting for me, congregating in the middle of the road, halfway between the church and the gas station. There were 5 in total, 4 men and 1 woman. All were dressed in the standard prison uniforms, and all were confused, with no memory of who they were or how they'd got there. I watched and listened as they spoke about the notes and the names they didn't recognize as their own. I felt sympathy for these people, but also a strange sense of envy, as at least they didn't know the terrible truth of what this town was. I guessed it was up to me to explain what was happening here, but where would I begin, and would they believe me? As it happened, there was no time for explanations, because our attention was drawn upwards to the blue skies under the mountains, as a dot descended from the heights like a winged raptor diving upon its prey. The first jet-black attack drone soared over the fake town. I noted its dark form and slick, disc-shaped design, but more concerning were the sinister weapons extending from its wings. The first target was the church that had been the center of all the previous scenarios, but the building had served its purpose and was no longer required. The drone's weapons burst to life, and 2 beams of bright blue energy fired out from its barrels. The deadly beam tore through the church's wooden walls, causing an almighty explosion inside, and soon the building was ablaze, burning fiercely as the killer drone moved on to its next target. I tried to organize the other test subjects, but it was impossible to calm them, as the town descended into pandemonium. 2 survivors attempted to flee onto the adjoining street, but both were cut down simultaneously by a second drone attack from the south. I could only watch on in horror as the energy beam cut their bodies to shreds, staining the street with blood and viscera. Me and another survivor took cover behind a parked car, avoiding the first drone as it made a pass of the street. I thought it was safe to emerge from the hiding spot, but when I did so, a shot rang out. The man beside me was hit, his skull exploding in a gruesome display. I glanced down the street and saw Drake standing in the gas station forecourt. The hunter appeared unmasked and was no longer armed with a Molotov cocktail, instead holding a smoking rifle. He smiled and winked in my direction before firing a second shot. The bullet whizzed just inches over my head, and I ducked down and ran, zigzagging to avoid the sniper's sight. Meanwhile, the town was burning around me as a squadron of killer drones attacked everything in their path, destroying buildings, cars, and people alike. I didn't see what happened to the other 2 test subjects, but I doubt they made it far. Now, I was only concerned with my own survival as I faced 2 deadly threats. I escaped inside of a smashed storefront, hiding inside as the drones made another pass, tearing up the street with their beam weapons as they went. I avoided the killer machines for the time being, but I knew Drake would be relentless. I hid behind a wall, arming myself with a sharp piece of fallen masonry as I waited for my attacker. I saw Drake entering through the smashed doorway, a crazed look in his eyes as he wielded his rifle. Waiting for a moment, I darted out from my hiding place, striking Drake on the side of the head. The hunter cried out and pulled the trigger, but his round harmlessly fired into the cracked ceiling. He struggled in the rubble. Drake was hurt, but not enough to disable him. I couldn't pull the rifle from his hand. Instead, I kicked the hunter in the groin before retreating to the back of the store. A shot rang out, followed by a second, which missed me by millimeters. I was going for the back door, but tripped over a fallen mannequin and collapsed heavily to the floor. When I looked up, I saw Drake standing over me, blood pouring from his head and a murderous glint in his mad eyes. He smiled sadistically, discarding his rifle and instead producing a hunting knife which he held over me.
I'm going to enjoy this.
There was no Eve to save me this time, and I only had one chance. Desperately reaching for anything I could use as a weapon, I laid my hand upon a shard of broken glass. Drake had his knife poised to strike, but this left him vulnerable. I used this opportunity to lash out with all my strength, stabbing Drake in the throat with the sharp glass. In an instant, Drake's eyes were filled with shock and pain. He dropped his knife and stumbled backwards. Then he unwisely pulled the glass from his neck, and his blood sprayed out like a fountain. I simply stood over Drake and watched him bleed out, feeling some sympathy for the man who'd been so committed to killing me. I saw the lights go out in his eyes and breathed a deep sigh of relief. It was only then that I noticed something. The town was still burning, but the attack drones seemed to have paused their violent attack. Cautiously, I walked back through the devastated store and out into the rubble-strewn street. And Gabriel was there waiting for me, still dressed in his white lab coat and looking entirely out of place in this dystopian hellscape.
I assume he's dead?
I nodded my head, confirming the deed was done. Gabriel seemed relieved at first, but a regret came into his eyes as he reached into his coat pocket.
I am sorry, Adam. For what it's worth.
I didn't understand what he meant, but then I saw a small black pistol in his hand. Gabriel fired, and the dart struck me in the chest. I looked to the bearded doctor with dismay, astonished by his unexpected betrayal, but soon all the strength left my body, and I returned to a familiar dark slumber. I came to in a different place, lying on the cold concrete floor within the underground complex. When my eyes adjusted, I saw what looked like a control center, with multiple monitors showing every corner of the now devastated town above. There were no guards, and I wasn't restrained, although my body was weak and my head was pounding. A familiar face was standing over me, a face I once thought of as a friend. It was Gabriel, the mysterious doctor who seemed to control this entire operation. He looked over me with contempt in his eyes, and I noted the gun tucked into his waistband underneath his lab coat. I was angry at Gabriel for his betrayal, and my first instinct was to attack my captor, but I was weak and he was armed, and despite my anger, I did want answers. "Why?" I croaked as I pulled myself up off the cold floor. "You said you'd help me."
I have done.
Gabriel replied without missing a beat.
Everyone else is dead. All the other subjects have been neutralized. You're the only one left. And that's because I spared you.
I shook my head vigorously. "I still don't understand. Why have you done this to us, to me? What have I done to deserve this torture?" Gabriel sighed and rolled his eyes.
Well, Adam, I hoped you would have remembered your past sins by now, but I suppose I'll need to prompt you.
He paused, adjusting his glasses before he continued.
Adam is not your real name, is it?
I raised my eyebrow in shock, thinking hard but only seeing pieces. Heartbreak, anger, a tragedy, smoke, fires, screaming. "I just don't know," I mumbled while looking down to the cold concrete.
I suppose I'd forget too if I was in your position. Well, Adam, your real name is Timothy Gray. You were convicted of first-degree murder 5 years ago and sentenced to death. You set your ex-girlfriend's apartment on fire one night after a drunken binge. She survived with third-degree burns, but a 4-year-old child in the neighboring apartment suffocated to death from smoke inhalation.
My stomach dropped and I felt physically sick, my head pounding as the terrible reality hit home. It all made sense now. The snippets of tragedy, the unfortunate crime of passion that I'd committed. It wasn't the concoction which made me forget. It was the guilt.
You were sentenced to death, and as far as the world knows, that sentence was carried out. People think you're dead, Tim. And even if they knew the truth, they wouldn't care. All the test subjects are death row prisoners. The woman you knew as Eve, she stabbed her elderly neighbor to death in an argument over a parking space. All of you are outside of decent society. By taking part in these experiments, you are at least doing a duty for your country. The data we've obtained from these scenarios will be invaluable.
I wanted to scream in fury, but the overwhelming guilt I felt had broken me. There was one thing I still didn't get. What about Drake? He was one of your own. You tricked me into killing him. Gabriel laughed sarcastically.
Yes. Good old Drake. He was a private first class in the military, you know. Shot dead his commanding officer. Drake was never one of us. He was a plant. Started out as a test subject, just like the rest of you. This Drake survived the last round of scenarios and was subsequently promoted. But the ex-soldier got too big for his boots. He became a problem and had to go.
So you manipulated me into killing him for you?
Yes, I did.
Gabriel confirmed without a shred of shame.
And you did a great job, Tim. That's why you're still here.
What do you want from me?
I want you to become the new Drake. The new snake in the garden, if you will.
He paused whilst looking upward.
The town above us is destroyed. The site will be cleansed and it'll be just as if we were never here. But the program will continue at a new site and with new test subjects. And, for the experiment to run smoothly, we'll need our control, our plant in the simulation. That's your new job, Tim.
I shook my head and answered with angry defiance. I won't do it. I won't play your games any longer. Gabriel didn't miss a beat as he reached into his waistband and withdrew his pistol.
Live rounds this time. You're already legally dead, Tim. I can shoot you down right here and now and will face no consequences. So, you could die in this moment, or accept my offer and live to fight another day. And who knows, one day you might even win your freedom. Get a chance to start over.
He smiled cruelly before delivering his final ultimatum.
The clock's ticking, my friend. What's it gonna be?
I'd like to say that I stuck to my guns and my story ended here, but alas, I was weak, just like I've always been. And so, I nodded my head in submission and accepted my fate. Okay, so that was the story. This one was by Mark Lynch, and what I really liked about this one was how it was in segments of different themes. You know, first the monster, then the zombies, and then the drones, like the robotic attacks and stuff. And it was really fun to do that because I got to do different types of sound design in one story instead of having just like one story that's about zombies or one story that's about this, that, and the other. It's like 3 in 1, and I got to kind of blend some of the sound design. So like if you notice what I did when they go into the sewer in the first two, the first time they go into the sewer, you can hear a muffled banging of the monster hitting like the sewer or the manhole cover. But then the second time they go in there, you can hear just like the zombies smacking at it. So like I was able to take that section that I had made of them going into the sewer and then repurpose that, but with zombies instead. And that was kind of fun. And then when the drones come in, that was really fun because then it goes all like robotic and stuff, and I got to do a lot of cool sound design with that. I'm hoping it wasn't too loud, so please feel free to give me feedback on that. I'm not sure if Mark plans on writing more to this, if he's going to add on to it, but I think it'd be a really cool series that he could go into, maybe kind of like SCP adjacent, where they have these facilities, like how they're going to destroy this town and start over. Maybe another series where it talks about this, but just with different types of entities or creatures or monsters or apocalyptic scenarios. It kind of reminds me of like SCP mixed with like the Fallout vaults. I don't know why, but yeah, let me know what you thought of this story. I hope you have a great weekend. I'll be in the comments like I normally am, and I'll see you on Monday for the next video. With that said, have a great day.
Thank you.